Millionaire sees a woman crying over his son's grave, then learns she carried his grandchild. Eleanor Brooks commanded boardrooms with the same quiet authority she used to navigate the hushed corridors of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. As the founder and driving force behind Brooks Publishing, one of New York City's most respected independent literary houses, she was a woman of discerning taste, sharp intellect, and formidable will. Her silver hair was always perfectly coiffed, her tailored suits bespoke, her demeanor poised and controlled. She had built an empire on words, yet the ones that mattered most seemed to have deserted her 3 years ago. 3 years today. 3 years since the call had come, shattering the elegant facade of her meticulously ordered world. James, her only child, her bright, adventurous, sometimes frustratingly idealistic son, was gone. The small charter plane carrying him and 2 colleagues back from a conference in Chicago had vanished from radar during a storm. The wreckage found days later in a remote stretch of Pennsylvania mountains. There were no survivors. James had been 31, full of life, just beginning to carve his own path, working in sustainable architecture, a field far removed from her literary world, a fact that had been a small point of contention, masked by maternal pride. Now, all that remained were memories, photographs that seemed too bright, too alive, and a gaping void in Eleanor's existence. Since the accident, Eleanor had maintained her composure publicly, her grief a private, tightly guarded thing. She threw herself into Brooks Publishing with renewed intensity, the demands of manuscripts and authors providing a necessary distraction. Her spacious Fifth Avenue apartment, once filled with James's sporadic visits and exuberant energy, now felt unervingly silent, a museum of a life that used to be. But today, the 3rd anniversary, was different. Today, the carefully constructed dam around her grief threatened to break. As she did on his birthday and the anniversary of his death, she cleared her schedule. No meetings, no calls, no manuscripts. Today was for James. Her driver, Michael, a stoic man who had been with her for 15 years and had known James since he was a teenager, drove her out of the city towards the sprawling, serene grounds of Westchester Hills Cemetery. He didn't need to be told the destination. He parked the gleaming black sedan near the familiar section under the shade of mature willow trees. Eleanor stepped out, clutching a bouquet of white lilies, James's favorite. The air was cool, the late autumn sky a pale, watery blue. The scent of damp earth and fallen leaves filled the air. She walked the familiar path, her heels sinking slightly into the soft grass, the silence broken only by the distant chirping of birds and the rustle of leaves underfoot. She approached the simple, elegant granite headstone, James Robert Brooks. Boulevardsson, 1989 to 2022. She knelt, arranging the lilies, her gloved fingers tracing the cold, carved letters of his name. Grief washed over her, familiar and suffocating. 3 years, and the ache was as sharp as ever. She closed her eyes, allowing the memories, both painful and precious, to surface. She prepared to spend her customary hour here, lost in remembrance, cocooned in her private sorrow. But as she opened her eyes, she realized she was not alone. Just a few feet away, partially obscured by the curve of the willow tree's drooping branches, knelt a young woman. Eleanor hadn't noticed her approach, lost as she was in her own thoughts. The woman's back was mostly towards her, but her shoulders were shaking with silent sobs. Her hands were pressed protectively against her abdomen, which was noticeably, undeniably round beneath her simple maternity dress. She was quite visibly pregnant, likely in her 3rd trimester. Eleanor froze, a complex mix of emotions swirling within her. Surprise, certainly. Curiosity, and, if she were honest, a faint prickle of intrusion. This was her space, her time with James. Who was this stranger, weeping so intensely at her son's grave? The young woman wore simple clothes-the dress, flat shoes, a worn cardigan despite the cool air. Her light brown hair was tied back loosely, strands escaping to frame a face hidden as she bent over, consumed by her sorrow. She seemed young, perhaps in her mid-20s, and utterly desolate. Eleanor watched for a moment, unsure whether to retreat and grant the stranger privacy or to approach. The woman's grief was palpable, raw, mirroring the ache in Eleanor's own chest, yet somehow different, sharper. In the pregnancy, it was jarring, a symbol of burgeoning life juxtaposed against the finality of the grave. Who was she? A former colleague James had been particularly close to? An old friend Eleanor hadn't met? James had a wide circle, and while Eleanor knew his closest friends, he had a life independent of hers. Still, this level of grief, 3 years later, seemed unusually intense for a casual acquaintance. And why here today? The woman let out a small, choked gasp, pressing her hands harder against her belly as if trying to contain an unbearable pain, either physical or emotional. Eleanor's maternal instincts, long dormant but never extinguished, stirred. Concern began to override her initial sense of intrusion. This young woman was deeply distressed, pregnant, and alone at her son's grave. Eleanor couldn't simply ignore her. Taking a steadying breath, Eleanor rose slowly from her kneeling position. The slight rustle of her coat on the grass made the young woman flinch and look up, her eyes wide and red-rimmed with tears, startled at being observed. The young woman scrambled to her feet, hastily wiping at her tear-streaked face with the back of her hand. She looked flustered, embarrassed, and deeply sad all at once. Her gaze darted from Eleanor to the headstone and back again, recognition dawning in her watery blue eyes. She clearly knew who Eleanor was, perhaps from photos James had shown her, or from the society pages Eleanor occasionally graced. "I'm so sorry," the young woman stammered, her voice thick with tears. "I didn't mean to intrude. I'll go." She took a step back, clutching her belly as if for support. Eleanor held up a gentle hand. "No, please don't go," she said, her voice softer than she'd intended. Years of commanding boardrooms had given her a naturally authoritative tone, but she consciously softened it now. "It's all right. I saw you were upset." The young woman looked down, unable to meet Eleanor's gaze. Fresh tears welled and spilled over. "I miss him," she whispered, the words barely audible. "So much." Eleanor's heart clenched. The simple, heartfelt words resonated deeply. "I do too," she replied quietly. "Every day." She paused, studying the young woman's distressed face, the undeniable swell of her pregnancy. "Forgive me for asking, but did you know my son well?" The question hung in the air. The young woman visibly tensed. She took a deep, shuddering breath, wrapping her arms more tightly around her middle. She seemed to be wrestling with herself, fear and grief warring in her expression. She started, then stopped, biting her lip. She looked at James's name on the granite marker, then back at Eleanor, her eyes filled with a desperate, pleading honesty. "Yes," she finally choked out. "I knew him." She hesitated again, tears flowing freely now. It was as if a dam inside her had finally broken after years of holding back. James was my lover," she whispered, the words tumbling out in a rush of grief and confession. Eleanor stared at her, utterly speechless. The world seemed to tilt slightly. James, her James, had a lover? A secret lover? It felt impossible. James shared everything with her, didn't he? Or had he? The sophisticated, controlled Eleanor Brooks felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Her carefully ordered understanding of her son's life suddenly fractured. "Your lover?" Eleanor repeated, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. The young woman nodded miserably, fresh sobs shaking her frame. We were together. Secretly. For almost 2 years before, she couldn't finish the sentence, overcome by emotion. Eleanor felt a whirlwind of questions, confusion, even a flicker of disbelief. Why secretly? Why had James never mentioned this woman? And why was she here now, pregnant and weeping at his grave? Seeing the shock and confusion on Eleanor's face, the young woman who introduced herself haltingly as Claire Miller seemed to feel the need to explain, to make Eleanor understand before she was dismissed. "I know it's hard to believe," Claire stammered, wiping furiously at her tears with trembling hands. "James, he didn't tell you. He didn't tell anyone." "But why, Claire?" Eleanor asked, her voice barely a whisper. The initial shock was giving way to a profound need to understand this hidden facet of her son's life. "He was afraid," Claire said softly, looking down. "Afraid of what you'd think, of what everyone would think." "Afraid of me?" Eleanor felt a pang of hurt mingled with her confusion. "Not exactly afraid of you," Claire clarified quickly, looking up again, wanting to be precise even through her tears. "He admired you so much, Mrs. Brooks. Respected you immensely. But our worlds were so different. I'm nobody. Just a girl from Queens who worked part-time at a bookstore." She explained how they had met. James, an avid reader despite his architectural focus, had frequented the independent bookstore where Claire worked near his downtown office. They struck up conversations about books, discovered shared interests, a spark ignited. At first, it was just coffee, Claire said, a faint, teary smile touching her lips at the memory. Then dinner. It just happened. We fell in love. Their relationship unfolded in secret corners of the city, small, out-of-the-way restaurants, walks in less crowded parks, evenings spent in Claire's tiny apartment. James, Claire explained, felt immense pressure from his family name, the expectations that came with being a Brooks. He felt his life was scrutinized, and he cherished the privacy, the normalcy he found with her. "He kept saying he'd tell you," Claire whispered, fresh tears welling. "When the time was right. He worried you'd think I wasn't good enough, or that I was after his money." She flushed slightly. He knew that wasn't true, but he said people in his world could be judgmental. "He wanted to protect me from that," he said. And maybe he was protecting himself too. Eleanor listened, her heart aching. She recognized the pressure James had felt, the weight of the Brooks name. Had she inadvertently contributed to it? Made him feel he couldn't share this vital part of his life with her? The too rich explanation wasn't about snobbery, Claire implied, but about the complex social dynamics, the fear of judgment, the desire for something purely his own. "He loved you very much, Mrs. Brooks," Claire added earnestly, seeming to read Eleanor's pained expression. "He talked about you all the time. He compartmentalized things. He thought he had time. We both thought we had time." They were together for nearly 2 years, Claire revealed. 2 years of hidden happiness, stolen moments, and plans for a future James swore they would have once he figured out how to bridge the gap between his two worlds. 2 years that Eleanor had known nothing about. It was another layer of loss, another part of her son she hadn't known, revealed only now by this weeping, pregnant stranger. Claire's voice grew heavy again as she moved from the hidden joy of their relationship to the sudden darkness that had enveloped it. "I heard about the plane crash on the news," she whispered, her eyes distant, reliving the horror. "They mentioned his name, James Brooks. I didn't want to believe it. I call his phone. over and over. Texted him. Nothing. She described the agonizing days that followed, scouring news reports, desperately hoping for a miracle, while having no official standing to inquire, no family member to turn to. She was completely alone in her grief, unable to even attend the funeral or memorial service without revealing the secret James had guarded so carefully. I watched the service online, she admitted, shame and sorrow mingling in her voice. I saw you were so strong. I wanted to reach out to tell you how much I loved him too, but I couldn't. It felt like I didn't have the right. Weeks turned into months. Claire struggled to cope, her grief profound and isolating. She lost weight, barely slept, moved through her days in a fog. Then came the second shock. I started feeling unwell, she murmured, her hand instinctively going to her belly again. I thought it was just the grief making me sick, but it didn't stop. I finally went to a clinic, and they told me, her voice broke. They told me I was pregnant. Eleanor's breath hitched. The timing was almost unbearable. To discover she was carrying James's child only after he was gone. I was terrified, Claire confessed, tears streaming freely again. Happy in a strange, broken way, because it was a part of him, but mostly terrified. I was alone. I barely made enough money at the bookstore to support myself, let alone a baby. And James was gone. She hadn't known what to do. The thought of approaching Eleanor, James's formidable mother, with this news felt impossible. She imagined disbelief, rejection, accusations. James's fears about judgment echoed in her mind, amplified by her own vulnerability and grief. I thought about options, she admitted, her voice barely audible. But I couldn't. It was James's baby. Our baby. I had to keep it. I had to figure it out on my own. So she had quit the bookstore as the pregnancy became noticeable, found cheaper housing further out in Queens, and took on remote freelance proofreading work, leveraging her love of books to scrape by. She lived frugally, isolated herself, determined to raise James's child alone, protecting the secret just as he had. But why now, Claire? Eleanor asked gently, needing to understand the final piece of the puzzle. Why come here today? Why tell me now, after almost 3 years? Claire took another shaky breath, looking around the quiet cemetery as if drawing strength from the peaceful surroundings or perhaps from James's presence. I don't know if I can do it alone anymore, she admitted, her voice raw with vulnerability. The baby's coming soon, maybe 6 or 7 weeks. And I'm so tired and so lonely. She explained that the weight of the secret, combined with the physical and emotional demands of the late stages of pregnancy and the looming reality of childbirth and single motherhood, had become overwhelming. The isolation she had imposed on herself was crushing her. And today, she continued, looking back at the headstone, being the anniversary, I needed to be near him, to talk to him, to tell him I'm scared, but I'm doing my best. She hadn't planned to see Eleanor. She hadn't planned to reveal anything. She had simply been overcome by grief and desperation, weeping at the grave of the man she loved, clutching the child he would never know. When you spoke to me, Claire said, meeting Eleanor's gaze directly now, her eyes pleading for understanding, it all came out. I couldn't hold it in anymore. Maybe a part of me hoped. Hoped you wouldn't hate me. Hoped that James's child, our child, might know its family. She looked down at her belly again. This baby, it's all I have left of him. I want the baby to know about James, about his father, and about his grandmother. The raw honesty, the sheer desperation and love in Claire's voice cut through Eleanor's remaining defenses. This wasn't a calculated ploy. It was a cry for help, a final, desperate act by a young woman pushed to her limit by grief, fear, and love. She saw not an opportunist, but but a fellow traveler in grief, bound to her by their shared love for James and by the precious life growing within her. Eleanor looked at Claire, truly looked at her. She saw the exhaustion beneath the surface, the fear in her eyes, but also a resilience, a quiet determination that reminded her, unexpectedly, of James himself. She saw the unmistakable signs of a difficult pregnancy carried under immense stress. And she saw the tangible evidence of her son's legacy, a continuation of his life she had never dared to dream possible. A grandchild, James's child. The thought sent a jolt through Eleanor, a surge of emotion so powerful it almost buckled her knees. Hope, fierce and unexpected, mingled with the enduring ache of grief. Disbelief warred with an undeniable yearning. Could it be true? The details Claire had shared the bookstore, James's specific anxieties, the timeline they rang with authenticity. Claire knew things a stranger couldn't possibly know. All the years of meticulous control, of guarded emotions, seemed to dissolve in that moment. Eleanor stepped forward, closing the small distance between them. She reached out, not to Claire's hand, but tentatively, hesitantly, towards her swollen abdomen. "May I?" she asked, her voice husky. Claire looked surprised, then nodded, her eyes wide and tear-filled. Eleanor gently placed her gloved hand on the curve of Claire's belly, and then she felt a distinct flutter, a tiny, insistent kick against her palm. A sign of life. James's life continuing. A sob escaped Eleanor's throat, raw and unrestrained. Tears, mirroring Claire's, streamed down her face. It was real. This child was real. A part of James was still here, waiting to enter the world. In that instant, any lingering doubt, any societal considerations, any fear vanished. There was only this miracle, this unexpected blessing rising from the ashes of tragedy. She wasn't just Eleanor Brooks, millionaire publisher. She was a grandmother. She opened her arms and pulled Claire into a tight embrace. Claire, small and trembling, clung to her, burying her face in Eleanor's shoulder, their shared tears dampening the expensive fabric of her coat. They stood there for a long moment, two women united by their love for James and the promise of the new life he had left behind. "You're not alone anymore, Claire," Eleanor whispered fiercely, her voice choked with emotion. "Neither of you are. You're coming home with me." The decision, once made, felt absolute. Eleanor released Claire gently, though she kept a supportive arm around her shoulders. Claire looked up at her, her expression a mixture of disbelief, relief, and lingering apprehension. "Home? With you?" Claire whispered, as if unable to grasp the sudden shift in her reality. "Yes," Eleanor confirmed, her voice firm but kind. "You need care. You need support. And this baby, James's baby, deserves to be welcomed into his family. Into our family." There were practicalities, of course. Eleanor, ever efficient even in emotional moments, took out her phone. She made a brief call to her driver, Michael, instructing him to bring the car closer to the path, adding simply, "We'll have a passenger." Then, she made another call to her housekeeper, Maria, a warm, sensible woman who had been with the family for decades and had adored James. "Maria," Eleanor said, her voice regaining some of its usual command but softened with underlying emotion, "please prepare the blue guest suite. We're having a guest stay with us indefinitely. A young woman. She's expecting. See that she has everything she needs." Claire listened, wide-eyed, as Eleanor calmly rearranged the world to accommodate her. It felt surreal, like a dream. Just an hour ago, she was weeping alone at a grave, feeling utterly hopeless. Now, James's mother, A woman she had feared and admired from afar was taking her home. Michael arrived with the car, his expression impassive, but his eyes holding a flicker of surprise as Eleanor gently guided a visibly pregnant, tearful young woman towards the back seat. He opened the door without a word, his loyalty absolute. The drive back to Manhattan was largely silent. Claire seemed dazed, occasionally looking over at Eleanor with an expression of wonder and uncertainty. Eleanor respected her silence, understanding the immense emotional upheaval she must be experiencing. She simply offered a reassuring smile whenever their eyes met. For Eleanor, the drive was filled with a tumultuous mix of emotions. Grief was still present, a constant hum beneath the surface, but was now overlaid with a burgeoning sense of purpose, of hope. She thought of James, imagining his reaction, perhaps initial shock, followed by relief, maybe even joy, that his two worlds were finally colliding, brought together by the child they had created. She looked over at Claire, frail and exhausted, but carrying the most precious gift imaginable. A fierce protectiveness rose within Eleanor. She would shield Claire, care for her, ensure she and the baby had everything they needed. She owed it to James, and she owed it to this grandchild she hadn't known existed until today. The future, which had seemed so bleak and empty just hours before, suddenly held a fragile, luminous promise. They were leaving the quiet sorrow of the cemetery behind, driving towards an uncertain but hopeful new beginning together. Arriving at Eleanor's Fifth Avenue apartment building, with its uniformed doormen and opulent lobby, was overwhelming for Claire. She hesitated, feeling acutely aware of her simple clothes and her current vulnerable state. Eleanor, sensing her discomfort, placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "This is home now, Claire," she said softly but firmly. Inside the penthouse, the sheer scale and elegance were breathtaking: high ceilings, polished floors, museum-quality art, and stunning views of Central Park. But Claire also sensed the underlying quiet, the pristine orderliness that spoke of a life lived largely alone. It felt less like a home and more like a beautiful, silent stage set. Maria, the housekeeper, greeted them with a warm, welcoming smile, though her eyes held a gentle curiosity. Having been briefed by Eleanor, she led Claire to the prepared guest suite, a spacious, beautifully appointed set of rooms overlooking the park, complete with a luxurious bathroom and a comfortable sitting area. Fresh flowers sat on a table, and soft linens adorned the bed. "If you need anything, Miss Claire, anything at all, you just let me know," Maria said kindly, her presence reassuring. Eleanor ensured Claire was settled, encouraging her to rest. She arranged for a highly recommended obstetrician to make a house call the next day, wanting to ensure Claire and the baby received the best possible care immediately. In the following weeks, a transformation began, not just in Claire's life, but in the atmosphere of the penthouse itself. Eleanor, initially navigating the situation with her characteristic efficiency, found herself increasingly drawn into the emotional reality of preparing for her grandchild. She took Claire shopping for maternity clothes, gently guiding her choices, but encouraging her to pick things she truly liked. They consulted with decorators, turning another guest suite into a warm, inviting nursery filled with soft colors, comfortable furniture, and carefully chosen toys and books, many of which Eleanor remembered James loving as a child. Eleanor found herself sharing stories about James, pulling out photo albums, painting a picture for Claire of the boy and man she had loved. Claire, in turn, shared her own memories of James's humor, his kindness, his dreams. They spoke of his love for architecture, his passion for sustainability, his sometimes goofy laugh. Through these shared reminiscences, they bridged the gap between their different worlds, building trust and a unique bond, united by their love for James and their anticipation for his child. Eleanor adjusted her work schedule significantly, delegating more to her trusted senior editors. She made sure she was present for Claire's doctor's appointments, listening intently to the baby's heartbeat, studying the ultrasound images with awe. She learned about prenatal nutrition, breathing techniques, and baby care, approaching it with the same thoroughness she applied to evaluating a manuscript. The pristine silence of the penthouse began to soften. There was conversation, the occasional sound of soft music Claire enjoyed, the planning and preparation for the baby's arrival. Maria bustled about, preparing nutritious meals and offering quiet encouragement to Claire. Even Michael, the driver, seemed less stoic, occasionally asking Claire how she was feeling. Eleanor realized how much she had closed herself off since James's death. Claire's presence and the impending arrival of the baby was like sunlight filtering into a long darkened room. The mansion was slowly, tentatively thawing, beginning to feel like a home once more, filled not just with memories of the past, but with the promise of the future. When Claire went into labor a few weeks later, Eleanor was a pillar of calm support, years of crisis management in the publishing world unexpectedly kicking in. She was by Claire's side at the hospital, holding her hand, offering words of encouragement, her earlier reserve completely replaced by maternal and grandmotherly concern. Michael waited anxiously downstairs, while Maria kept everything ready at home. After hours of labor, the sound of a baby's first cry filled the room. A healthy baby boy. He had a tuft of dark hair, like James's, and when he opened his eyes, they held a familiar spark. Claire, exhausted but radiant, looked at Eleanor, tears of joy streaming down her face. "James," she whispered. "We should name him James." Eleanor nodded, her own eyes brimming. "James Robert Brooks, Jr.," she agreed, her voice thick with emotion. "It's perfect." Bringing baby James home was the final step in the mansion's transformation. The quiet elegance was replaced by the vibrant, chaotic, and utterly joyful reality of life with a newborn. The sounds of gurgles, coos, and occasional cries echoed through the halls. The nursery, once pristine, was now filled with the gentle clutter of baby essentials. Eleanor, the powerful publisher, discovered an entirely new dimension to herself as a doting grandmother. She learned to change diapers, warm bottles, and rock baby James to sleep, singing soft lullabies. She would spend hours just watching him sleep, marveling at his tiny features, seeing traces of her son in his face. Her grief for James hadn't vanished, but it had softened, transformed into a legacy of love embodied by his son. Claire blossomed in her role as a mother, her earlier fear and insecurity replaced by confidence and overwhelming love for her baby. With Eleanor's support and resources, she no longer had to worry about financial struggles or isolation. She enrolled in online courses, pursuing her interest in literature, supported by Eleanor's encouragement and the resources of Brooks Publishing. She had found not just security, but a family. The grand penthouse, once a monument to success and solitude, was now filled with warmth, laughter, and the undeniable presence of love, the enduring love for the James they had lost, and the new, burgeoning love for the James who had arrived. Eleanor had opened her home and heart, and in return, Claire and baby James had healed her in ways she never thought possible. James Sr.'s love hadn't died in the plane crash. It lived on, vibrantly, in the laughter of his son and the unlikely, loving family brought together in his memory.